Welcome to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. My name is Patrick Ledden, and I have the honor each week of sitting down and talking to a leader who works in the C-Suite of an organization, literally around the world or across industries. Today's conversation is no different. Today I talk to Brandtech Group founder and CEO David Jones. It's the largest global Gen AI marketing firm. In our conversation, we talk about how he's grown his business from himself to 7,000 employees in just a few years and what he's learned along the way. We give you insights about Gen AI, how it's rapidly changing the world, and not just the world outside your window, but the world inside your organization. And David shares some ideas about talent, training, and technology that you need to embrace in order to grow in a successful organization that is able to use generative AI to be successful. So you're going to want to grab something to write with, sit back and prepare to take some notes as David and I get together in a C-Suite conversation. David Jones, thanks so much for joining me in C-Suite Conversations.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you here. You and I had a chance to chat before we got started, and I started to learn a little bit of what you've been up to these days. But folks listening to the conversation may or may not be that aware of you and your career, although they will be and they should be. But could you tell a little bit about your background and kind of what you do these days?
Sure. So in 2015, I left the big corporate world where I'd been the global CEO of one of the big public listed advertising groups. And I created the Brandtech Group, and I built it with a mission to help brands do all of their marketing better, faster, and cheaper using technology, but also importantly, using machine generated content and AI. So that was 2015. Today, we're $1 billion in revenue, 7,000 people. We work with 8 of the world's top 10 global advertisers, 49 of the top 100. We've kind of grown on average significantly over 20% organically every year. And I would say it's gone a bit crazy because everybody now wants generative AI, and we're the world's #1 generative AI marketing platform.
So I mentioned to you on the front end, and that's an amazing journey, by the way. I'm going to pick into those, kind of get into those numbers a little bit and the success of your growth so far, because I want to learn a little bit like what's it like to be at the helm of something that's moving that quickly. But before we do, kind of level set for the audience. So there's people who spend a fair amount of time at least doing something AI related. Probably all of us do, whether we realize it or not. But what are some of the fundamental understanding that people need to have in order to even kind of be in the game?
Okay, so look, I would say that generative AI is going to change marketing and business more than television, the internet, social, mobile, gaming combined. I think it will be bigger than the Industrial Revolution, and I think there are a few reasons for that. The first one is that whatever any of us think, the world's biggest tech companies are literally spending billions on a daily basis to ensure that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So Google any one of the top CEOs of any of the tech companies, and they've all said, this is the biggest thing in history. The second reason is that the world's investors are saying that. So you've only got to look at the valuations of the open AIs, but look at NVIDIA, who, and I've talked about them in my presentations for a few years, and I kind of have the trajectory going, oh, they're worth more than 2 trillion. Oh, they're worth more than 3 trillion. Oh, they're the most valuable company in the world. The third reason is, and more importantly, and probably both of those, is that the world's people are saying that. So the fastest technology in human history to get to 100 million users was ChatGPT 3.5. But I think the really big one for everyone in marketing to understand is that everything else that I talked about up front and that we've dealt with in marketing, from television to the internet to mobile to social to e-commerce to gaming, was a vertical. Generative AI is a horizontal. There is not a single thing that we already do as humans with our brains that you can't do better, faster, and cheaper using generative AI and technology. So, anything we use our brains to do, you can already do that better, faster, cheaper using Gen AI. And I think, the fifth reason, if you play around for any length of time with the tools, they're actually spectacular. The things this can do are pretty remarkable. So those are the reasons why I think it's going to be completely game-changing, not just for marketing, but for business and for the world. And I think the other thing that's exciting for everyone in marketing, it's rare that the best use case of a new technology is actually marketing. And in this case, it is. Like, one of the best use cases for generative AI is marketing and creativity and advertising.
It's interesting. So I've been at the last 11 years, I was teaching at Vanderbilt University, and there was a bit initially on about AI or even ChatGPT, for example, where it was a little bit like, well, we need to guard the old way things were, right? Like, all right, let's just ban it. But that's not the reality is you can't ban it. And the reality is you had to realize like, how do I use this as a tool in the classroom to make it a better experience for students? So you start coming up with all different kind of creative ways to do that. And obviously things like testing or assignments, you have to kind of come up with new ways to actually make sure that people are getting this stuff in their gray matter and they're not just fully dependent on something else to write it for them. But it's become a really interesting experience. And I'm just curious, that's just one little example in my own little world, but what have you seen where maybe there was an initial some resistance, but then the decision to embrace it is really accelerated in a particular business or industry, or what have you seen from a use case perspective?
Look, I think, as humans, we always resist change. It's like, oh my God, this new thing will be terrible. And look, I'm a human, but I'm special. And, I just, and then that's obviously constantly disproved. Just like if you were going from New York to London, if you don't want to get in one of those newfangled airplane things, and I think in any technology that's been the case. But what I think is really important is this is not a future thing. So we own a company called Pencil. And Pencil is the only company in the world that's been making ads end to end since 2018 using generative AI. And they've made over 1 million ads using generative AI across 5,000 brands and spent close to $2 billion of media through the platform. And in simple terms, it aggregates all of the best models and plugs directly into the social media accounts, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Across that data set, the ads basically are produced 10 times faster. They are at least 50% cheaper, and they perform at least twice as well. And that's, and that's not like the theory of in the future, this might be possible. That's since 2018, what that $2 billion of spend across 5,000 brands and 1 million ads has shown. And it's getting better and better, not, I would argue, on a quarterly or monthly basis, but almost on a weekly basis. So, I think the most important thing to understand is this isn't a future thing that in the future we will be able to. The most progressive and advanced brands are already doing it now at scale. Now, they're not necessarily shouting about that too loudly externally because they think they've got a huge competitive point of advantage and they don't want to alert all their competitors to what's going on.
It's interesting. When I was reading up on this, on your business with Brandtech and the idea of better, faster, cheaper, I thought about, well, there's a lot of value in being agile and seeing around corners and particularly, how rapidly AI is evolving. But I really was kind of questioning, especially in light of your comment about change and how sometimes we often resist change. How do you, in something that's rapidly evolving, somebody who's listening to this podcast right now, to realize like it isn't coming, it's here, and how do I stay ahead of that curve as a layperson, just kind of understanding how quickly this thing is moving?
So look, I think the most important thing to understand is that no one is yet late. I would say there's a few things that I think are important to do. I think firstly, on a personal level, just play with all the tools, create business plans, have press releases, come up with packaging, come up with branding ideas. Literally just go take 5 minutes and just create yourself a new brand, using ChatGPT 4.0. And you'll be, if you haven't done it, you'll be amazed at how good it actually is. And then get into playing around with Midjourney and what you can do there and look at Runway. And so I think the first thing is to say at a personal level, and clearly don't put confidential company information into these public models, but just play around yourself and get a sense of it. The second thing is to follow the people who are putting out, some of the more interesting comments, and whether that's subscribing to their email newsletters or just following different people on social media. Because I think the other thing that's happening is, the speed with which amazing content is now both being created and shared. And I think, if you look back, 2 years ago, if you put a prompt into Midjourney and said, hey, I want to see, an image of an otter on a plane, it was like a cartoony-esque image. It was quite cute and fun, but it was clearly nothing, that realistic or great. Today, you have a video of an otter sitting on a mobile phone by a plane window on the inside of the plane, and it looks super realistic. If you did the same thing, asking for an image of a human, 2 years ago, it looked pretty terrible, had 7 fingers, the nose was in the wrong direction. A year ago, it's not bad. Today, you would not be able to tell it is not a real human being. And then if you look at the progress that models like Runway are making, it's quite remarkable, and it was quite, for me, a seminal moment in understanding how marketing was going to change. Over the summer, a creator created a TV commercial for Volvo in under 24 hours for a few $100s. Now, to be clear, the Volvo client didn't ask them to create this TV commercial. They did it off their own back on spec. But you look at it and you go, like, up until now, that was at least $1 million and would have taken 6 months. And it is now basically free and under 24 hours. And that's going to have the most game-changing impact on the way all marketing is done and everything that happens in the future. So I think the more you're following these things and looking at these things and almost saying to yourself, well, hang on, if this is now possible, why are we still creating all our content the way we have for the last 20 or 30 years?
It's interesting when you were talking about like the ability to generate an image of an author on a plane with a video and holding the phone and doing all those.
So that was an otter, an animal.
Otter. I thought you said an author. I was like, how do I know what your job is? But okay, an otter.
My British accent, an otter. Yeah, it'd be really boring doing authors. Anything you do with technology or AI, you have to do animals.
I was like, oh, there's a picture of Charles Dickens on a plane. How interesting is that? So I was thinking about when you're just talking about the images in 7 fingers and things like that. It is true. I mean, it wasn't that long ago they'd say, well, that crowd is not real. Take a look. There's 3 people with their arms going through the chest of someone else and all these other type of things. But now when somebody's like, oh, that's not real. If you look, at the 20,000th person over here in the corner, I think they have 2 extra digits on their hand. And it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, it has changed rapidly. And whether knowing something is real or knowing something is fiction. And actually on a recent episode of this podcast, we had Joe Whittinghill, who's the chief learning officer at Microsoft. And he said one of the most valuable skills in the future of the workforce is to be able to employ the ability to decipher fact from fiction. How do you at Brandtech work to support this concept of recognizing like fact from fiction?
Yeah, look, I don't know. There's a whole philosophical debate as to whether that really is going to be the most important skill or not. Because often technology comes along and solves the things that we think, we're going to have to solve. Look, I think the speed of progress point you just made. I mean, you take Pencil in 2018, 1 in 10,000 ads it created was good. Today, it's 100%. It's just getting better and better. And we will look back on what we have today 3, 4, 5 years from now and think it's terrible. I mean, I'm old enough to have owned both a Newton and a Palm Pilot, and they were all like, you open them up, took them out of the box, played with them. They were terrible. You put them back on the shelf and never use them again. And then obviously someone created the iPhone, and that's been quite useful and helpful in the world. And I think the same thing is going to happen. But I mean, I think, obviously, is something real or not? And you can get into, digital watermarks around that. You obviously have issues like bias. And if you ask most of the models to show you a CEO, you get a white, middle-aged man. But again, there are technology solutions to that. We built something called Bias Breaker, which will ensure that whatever prompt you put in, you get 5 different layers of diversity back in the images that you see. So it removes the onus from the human to keep prompting for it and gives it to you automatically. And I think there will be many, technology solutions to a lot of the issues, but all the same issues we are going to face that we faced around the social media world, from data and privacy. Copyright is obviously a huge one. The energy and footprint that all of this is going to take. So there's a lot of, this isn't something which it's just upside and all good. And we're going to have to be very careful to steer the future of generative AI in the right direction, or it won't have a very big future.
I was thinking about that as you were going through and just, again, talking about some of the changes going on. There's got to be people listening to this right now who, maybe they're saying I'll wait it out, or as if it's gonna completely go away, or I'll get on second, third, fifth, 20th generation, whatever it might be. And I'm just wondering if the leaders you're working with, that the brands you're working with, if they're leaning into this because they're concerned that although you said earlier it's never too late to get involved, but are they feeling like, gosh, this train's moving so quickly, I better get on it, because if I don't, whether it's in my own career and building my own skills, or building a brand in an organization, or helping pivot my business into new places, I better get involved in this conversation because it's moving.
Yeah, look, I think it's a few things. I think firstly, you probably can't find anyone in marketing who would say that they wished they'd done their previous digital transformation slower. So I think the background is that everybody's just been through a pretty big digital transformation, and most people would view the fact they were a bit slow to do that, and they've got the opportunity to not be slow this time around. The second thing is that I think the leaders of all of the world's biggest businesses have understood and are seeing very clearly the potential. In fact, Price Waterhouse do an annual global CEO study. And in it, obviously, all the CEOs said they thought Gen AI would be big. But I think the fact that was really interesting was that 61% of them thought that it would have a significant impact on their top and bottom line and their products and services in the next 12 months. So this wasn't in the next, 10 or 15 years. And I think if you have organizations where the leaders are saying this is important, everybody kind of goes, okay, this is important. And I think thirdly, when people are testing and piloting, they are seeing really, really concrete, tangible results. So if I were to describe sort of the last 2 years and break it into the three phases of generative AI, the first phase was probably, typically you'd hear one or two things. Either, look, I think this is really exciting, but my general counsel has told me we're not allowed to do this or I get fired. Or the other one was, I've seen this, it's a bit crap, not yet. Then I would say phase two was very much about pilots and test cases. And then I think everyone who has been doing those has seen how well they've worked. And phase three is now about scale deployment. We've done some cases and we've done some pilots. They have worked brilliantly. How do I now take this to every single one of my 500 brands globally? Because every single marketeer will be able to take at least 50% out of the budgets they are spending on content within 3 years. And there is a short-term window to get the benefit of that, because everyone will be doing that 3 years from now. So if you can be first, you can then take some of those savings and stick them into, media budgets, or what they call working media, and drive growth and steal share for your brand. But if you get there last, you'll just be playing catch up and someone else will have done that. So I think all of those things come together to kind of underscore just how big the potential is, but also the sense of urgency.
You hit the word scale, and that's a word obviously that comes up in a lot of different conversations. Like, we talk to a lot of clients at Franklin Covey, and they're wanting to develop their leaders at scale. So it's one thing to say, okay, we can develop 5 or 10 leaders in a very refined cohort experience, but how do we scale it? And that's what Franklin Covey's worked on for 40 years, is how do you do that? But scale has its own challenges. So I'm just curious, like, what are the challenges you're seeing when organizations try to go from, okay, it worked here, we got the author and the otter working together, it looks awesome. How do we scale this to lots of authors and otters? If you just jumped into the podcast, which I don't think you would have, go back and you'll figure out why I said otters and authors.
Look, I think I would stick it into 3 buckets: talent, training, and technology. And I think the first one is the talent requirement. This is a new skill set, and I think the analogy I like to use, going back to airplanes, but you remember those videos of the early attempts at flight where people fly for 100 yards and crash into the ground. When you're looking at that, it is impossible to understand that one day 4 billion people will fly annually, or 4 billion passengers will be carried annually, that there'll be new jobs like pilot and air traffic controller, and then the biggest retail places on the planet will be the world's airports. You just can't comprehend that. And we're going to live through that, but we're going to live through that on an incredibly compressed cycle. And, but at the moment, going back to the talent piece, like, we don't have any pilots because no one's been flying. So it's all about how do you get a disproportionate share of the talent you're going to need for this new world. One of our big clients, they have a role which is head of AI business transformation, but actually it's much more an HR and talent role than it is a technology role. So first thing is about what talent you need, and what are the new roles and the new skill sets you're going to be looking for. Second thing is training, because you can also upskill and train the talent you have. I mean, we have some incredible Gen AI talent in the group today, but some of whom weren't doing it at all 2 years ago and have become some of the biggest experts out there. So training is critically important. And I think there's a bigger training need in the world around Gen AI and use of Gen AI than probably anything we've seen in the last 50, 100 years. And then finally, the technology piece. If are you working with the right tools on every level, i.e. are they the best platforms and technology and tools for the job, but also are they safe enough, or are you going to end up part of class action lawsuits because you've been playing with stuff, or you're going to end up not owning the copyright? And so just making sure that as you're looking at the technology platforms that you're using, that you're green lighting the ones that will give you copyright, that won't train with your data, that will, that are basically built on pretty secure data and training models. So I think those are sort of the three core areas. What talent you need, how you're going to train the talent you have and upskill the talent, and bring in new talent. And finally, what technology platforms and bets are you going to be making?
Well, I would imagine in your role, and I'm going to stay with these three things. I think it'll be really helpful for the listeners to kind of explore their own organizations and their own career. So I would imagine that, in your role as the CEO of a rapidly growing organization, you said, 20% each year. So you're kind of on the front of this thing that's moving very quickly. And at the same time, you're also in talking to brands that you work with and leaders and executives at other organizations. And it's one thing to intellectually get the idea, okay, you talk about a talent is moving rapidly and new jobs are going to be, that don't even exist today are going to need to be existed in the future. We're going to figure out how to train and upskill people. We need to use technology appropriately and in ways that really help fuel what we're trying to achieve. But I can understand all that intellectually, but then you leave the room, David, and I'm sitting with my leadership team saying, okay, that was all really interesting, but what do we do with it? How do we know the technology isn't something that's going to cause us copyright problems? I know the general counsel would give us advice on that, but how do you do it? Maybe where have you seen people starting to do it well?
So look, I think the first thing is going back into the pilots and the tests. Is if you're putting in place pilots and tests, you have the ability to go through and make a ton of the learnings along the way before you've decided to roll something out at global scale in a tens of billions organization. So I think identifying the pilots, what you're going to use, what technology you're going to use, are you going to go all in on one, are you going to use multiple, I think is critically important. On the talent and training piece, what training program have you got in place? And if you haven't got one in place, put one in place. And what training do you need people to have? There's, I think, basic training in general to do with Gen AI, what it can do, what it can't do. But then obviously you've got to get very specific about what have you as an organization decided you want it to be doing or not. And we have clients who have said we never want generative AI to generate a human. So can we make sure that we're working with platforms that won't allow that to happen? But I think the training piece is critically important. And then on talent, we have a fundamental belief, and you kind of alluded to this at the start. I think human fear is, oh my God, I'm going to be replaced by technology. But actually, if you look back through human history, every time humans have been given amazing tools, they have done incredible things with them. And they've been huge drivers of growth and progress in the world. And I think I'm very optimistic about the potential for generative AI. I mean, I think we're going to see the greatest creative revolution in history. I often say that the mobile phone made everyone a creator. Generative AI makes everyone an ad agency. So, there were no creators in the creator economy 15 years ago or so. It didn't exist. And today there are over 60 million people who make a living as creators. Influencers have become huge. The role that they're playing in brands, you ask any 12-year-old who are the 10 kind of famous people you would most like to meet, 7 of them are influencers. And so I think you're going to see this incredible creative revolution on the back of generative AI, and it's super exciting. And probably the sort of the best macro way of summing that up is if you think back to the 1800s, over 95% of people in the world worked in farming or agriculture. Today it's less than 2%. So logically, there should be absolutely mass unemployment in the world, shouldn't there?
Mm-hmm.
But there isn't, obviously, and we know. And less than 2% of people, because everyone's doing other things. And I think that's exactly what is going to happen in and around generative AI. And what you will see is that those people who adopt it fast and early and embrace it will get a huge competitive advantage over those who don't. And whether that's at a corporate level or an individual level, but the human in the loop is really important. I mean, if I sat down and gave you a demo of Pencil, and I had one of our expert creative people show what it can do, and someone had never used it before, you would think it's brilliant when the expert creative person uses it. You think it's like, oh, that's okay, when the person who's a novice. And so that capability and that human skill set is critical.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I was talking to somebody the other day who she was between roles, and in the kind of interim job in between, it was basically training AI. So she had a particular skill set in a language, and she would spend all day having a conversation with AI, helping it to, I guess, better use that language. And it's like that didn't exist before. So there's lots of things that exist. And she said it was a really interesting experience to go through the process of doing that. And which makes me think about your own organization. So you mentioned earlier rapid growth, right? Did you say 20% each year?
On average, significantly over 20%.
Yeah. So I owned a company for 11 years. We had about, double digit each year. That was a lot to stay out in front of. It was, it's easy the first couple of years, but as it continues to grow, it gets harder and harder to keep double digit growth. So I'm just curious, like from your perspective, not only are you out speaking about this and thinking about this and, advising others, but at the same time, you're building your own organization. So just talk a little bit about, leading an organization that is growing rapidly.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the only way of doing it successfully is have a phenomenal team.
Sure.
I think that's what it all comes back to. Is it is impossible as one founder and CEO to sit above an organization on your own and do everything yourself. And I think, when I'm often talking to founders, I will talk about, how do you go from founder as bottleneck to founder as rocket fuel? So rather than being the bottleneck that's stopping the company growing, you're actually the rocket fuel behind it. Now, obviously, if you talk to my team, they'll all tell you that I'm the bottleneck. And then I think it's about ensuring that you have, so not just, a fantastic team, but you have a team with very diverse skill sets. And, those skill sets tap into, like, I know what I'm good at. I don't need someone else who's good at what I do. I need people who are good at what I'm not good at, and vice versa. And I think, that's how you make a successful company. Diverse teams in every sense of the word make, for better organizations. And then I think the more that you can create a culture that people understand and embrace, and I have to say one of the companies I think has done this, very well is Amazon. They've really codified their culture. So that, in a company that probably has more than 1 million employees, everyone can quite quickly work out, what is the Amazon culture and how do we do things here, and putting in place various techniques and tools. But I think that's one of the hardest things as a company gets bigger and bigger is, it's super easy when there are 10 of you in a room to have a kind of really cohesive culture and a very clear understanding of what everyone does. But, in our journey, we've gone from just me to 7,000 people. And how you keep that strong sense of culture. Someone summed it up very nicely. They sort of said, what you've got to do is you've got to get people as passionate about your brand and business as they are about their favorite sports team. And if you can do that, then you have succeeded.
It's funny you say that because sometimes I'll talk to clients and they'll say something. They'll be talking about the culture of the people in the organization. They'll say something like, "Oh, you don't know our people." When I say like, "Oh, people can get creatively excited," they'll say, "You don't know our people," and they're being a little bit cynical, probably maybe frustrated. Who knows what it is? And I'll say, "Go out in the parking lot and just look at the bumper stickers on their car and tell me they aren't passionate about something." And they are. They get fired up about things. So how do we tap into that? And actually, as you were going through that, David, you were doing actually a really nice illustration of what we do at Franklin Covey. So we work with helping individuals be great contributors. We work with leaders at all levels, including leading themselves, to do what you were talking about as far as working together. Stephen Covey, one of our founders, said that great teams are complementary. You take the weaknesses of one person, you make them irrelevant by the strengths of others. That's what a great team is. It's a diverse team where everybody can bring their best. We also work on culture. How do you build a high trust winning culture? And the fourth piece of our kind of our performance package that we work with, if you will, is around execution. And it's about how do you execute strategy. And one thing we find is really important is, creating a cadence or rhythm that you follow. As you've been scaling this business, if I was to join David's organization, if I was a brand new employee at Brandtech, what would I know? What would I learn about the cadence in which you move as an organization, the cadence in which you set and accomplish goals?
So look, but just before I answer, I think it's really interesting because I was thinking about, I was going to say a thing to you and you sort of went there, which is, there's idea, strategy, execution, culture. And I think, when you start out, you think the idea is the most important thing. And being an entrepreneur and a founder and spending, tons of time with them and investing in lots of them, actually the idea is the least important on one level. Ideas are kind of easy. The culture is probably the single most important thing that is going to dictate whether you succeed or fail. So almost in order, it's, idea, strategy, execution, culture in that order. Culture is the most important, followed by execution, followed by strategy, followed by idea, which might sound kind of counterintuitive. Look, I think that it comes to us. There's probably, sort of, if someone said to me, "Hey, I'm joining the company. What's important to us?" It would probably be like, be kind, be fast, and be disruptive. Against a background of obviously being very passionate. I mean, our founding belief was we think you can do all marketing better, faster, and cheaper using technology, using AI and machine generated content. And, when I said that in June 2015, nobody understood what it meant, but no one else was trying to do it. And fast forward to today, what's great is like within 10 seconds, everyone knows what you're doing. But the entire planet is trying to say they're doing it too. But I think when it comes to us, it's like, the be kind thing. I mean, I think the matrix of nice, nasty, smart, stupid, it's like you really want the nice, smart people, and you actually do not want, smart, nasty, because that will kill your culture faster than anything. Be fast. I think, speed, and particularly in and around technology, is so important. And just be disruptive. It's like, the big legacy way is not going to be the way that it's done in 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And, companies get disrupted not because they're crap. They get disrupted because they're really successful. And they're too successful to kind of do that little new disruptive thing, which is tiny. And then one day that little new disruptive thing, which is tiny, becomes, the giant thing. And I think just making sure you're constantly looking to disrupt yourself is the way that you never get disrupted.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, as we wrap up our conversation, David, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to share just one piece of advice, and you've given so many along the way, but one piece of advice, whether I'm in the C-suite right now listening to the podcast or I'm somewhere else in my career kind of moving forward, and what do I need to do to make sure that I keep progressing toward whatever goal I'm trying to achieve?
So I'm going to give you two different versions. One is something an entrepreneur friend said to me, which I think is a wonderful piece of advice. He said, when you're given two choices in life, always pick the one that's the better story. And I think that is just a wonderful piece of advice for business, life, and things in general. And then I think the specific one, I just be really curious and jump in, And you don't have to be naively optimistic and, drink the Kool-Aid on anything new you see. But unless you've been curious and checked it out, you can't have your own view on how big you think this might be or how good you think it is, or even understand how it's changing. I think it's quite interesting talking to some people in and around the Gen AI space. Their views are stuck 18 months ago. So they will give you an answer on something because the last time they looked 18 months ago, it was crap at that.
Yeah.
It's now brilliant at that, but they don't know. So I think particularly when it comes to this moment we're going to go through where generative AI is going to be so game changing for all things marketing is, the only difference between an expert and a novice is the time that someone has taken to play with the tools, to understand the tools, and to engage. And I see people regularly go from not knowing that much about something to being real experts, and they've just jumped in more than anyone else. So don't just put a toe in the water, leap into the deep end.
I love that. Well, folks, I think we could wrap it up with the idea of be kind, be fast, and be disruptive. And David, you've been kind, you've been fast, you've covered so much ground, and I think our conversation went pretty quick. Hopefully, folks who are listening to us are like, okay, I got to go back and pick up those 3 more nuggets because that was awesome. So go back and listen again, folks, and then be disruptive. I think you disrupted my thinking, listeners' thinking, and you continue to disrupt the marketplace with what you're doing at Brandtech Group. So thanks so much for joining us, David.
Cheers, Patrick. My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, folks, that's all I have for today's episode. Big thanks to David Jones from Brandtech for joining me today to share his insights about Gen AI. I think you would all agree after listening to that things are moving rapidly. But as David said, it's never too late to get on board. So I encourage you to embrace his thoughts around talent, training, and technology and use those as appropriate to grow your organization. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.